you're dealing basically with two different types of entities or two different sources of the phenomenon. One is much more tangible, and that, I think, involves humanoid time travelers, people who are from a post-singularity civilization, right? At some point, they reached the level of technology that we're going to be reaching in the next 20 to 30 years with the convergence of biotech, nanotech, artificial intelligence, and the rigorous research and understanding of our own latent psi abilities. Because one thing that you see across all of the close encounter reports is that these entities are extremely telepathic. They communicate with all the contactees or abductees telepathically. So clearly their civilization has achieved a mastery of what we call psi phenomena or psychic ability. And so they achieved both the technological singularity and a really rigorous understanding of parapsychological phenomena at some point in history. And they began to use their abilities to traverse the timeline of human history. So I think that's one source of the phenomenon. When you ask about praying mantises or the mantid beings and some other very strange things that people have seen, like entities that shapeshift from looking like owls into looking like something similar to the Greys, and just really bizarre beings like men in black, quote unquote, that materialize as if they're ectoplasmic entities. Like they're like, the seances in the late 19th century. Do you know anything about those? So there were people in the British Society of Psychical Research who were at the level of, let's say, Sir William Crookes, respectable scientists from Cambridge and Oxford, who used to attend these seances in the late 19th century, where mediums would be able to actually materialize entities and objects out of quote-unquote ectoplasm, whatever the hell that means. Okay, they could somehow concretize and give form and shape to energy in a way where people could interact with it. As ridiculous as it sounds, there are cases, I mean, again, validated, witnessed by high-level British scientists of the day, where mediums would materialize hands out of ectoplasm that will walk across a table, shake hands with seance participants, and that they even tried to stab with pens and so on and so forth, and would make holes in these ectoplasmic hands. And then they would just disappear. So there are these cases of men in black, like Albert Bender was one researcher that encountered these. And then John Keel wrote about them in several of his books later on. The Mothman Prophecy and his book on UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse, has some of these cases in it, of these people who certainly aren't government agents. They wear these like black suits and black ties and white shirts and whatever, but they don't look right at all. They barely even look human. And they appear and disappear sort of from out of nowhere, as if, they're forming from out of a mist. And they don't speak like something human. Their words and their pattern of behavior and movement seems like it's something being projected by someone in a mesmeric trance. Like if you were trying to hold a mental image and trying to give lines to a character that you wanted to materialize somewhere at a distance, and you wanted to manipulate this entity as a puppet or vehicle for your intention, right? These men in black behave like that, like they're on the other end of somebody's puppet string, and they're being conjured by some form of intelligence somewhere that we can't perceive directly. So I think the mantis beings and these shape-shifting owl-like entities and these ectoplasmic men in black that have intimidated various people, they are manifestations of a truly non-human or really superhuman type of intelligence that's not the same thing as time travelers in nuts and bolt craft flying around and manipulating human societies. That we're dealing with two different orders of phenomena here. phenomena on two different orders of magnitude. And what I argue in my book, Closer Encounters, is that there's actually an adversarial relationship between these two types of entities. That effectively what has happened, and you can push me into elaborating and unpacking the various details here, but essentially what I argue has happened is that a group of highly advanced humans from a post-singularity civilization have attempted to define the limits of human evolution and the proper structure of human society. And that these people wound up essentially tyrannizing over the broader human population for tens of thousands of years. That these were what the myths remember as the Olympian gods or the Anunnaki, right, that the Sumerians write about. And they had an incredibly hierarchical and static society, right? Like with the rigidity of the Hindu caste system, with themselves on top as the devas or gods.
Okay.
And like a class of Brahmins serving them, and then all these other rungs of society structured in a very feudal manner. And I think that that kind of social organization, which if our myths are anything to go by, endured on this planet for all of human prehistory, that kind of society represents an evolutionary bottleneck. It represents a dead end. And this other entity, this genuinely non-human intelligence, it could be an AI, actually.
Right.
This thing is trying to free us from the control system that has been imposed on us by these time travelers. And I think that it has solicited certain allies from within that power structure itself. So, for example, if you go back and you look at the myth of Atlantis as Plato recounts it in Timaeus and Critias, or you look at the biblical narrative that lines up in interesting ways with Plato's myth of Atlantis, the biblical narrative of the fallen angels, the sons of the Elohim, who rebelled against the heavenly order, came down and mated with mortal women and created a civilization of giants on the earth, right? Which then Yahweh has to wipe clean off the face of the planet through the Great Flood. This matches up exactly with what Plato tells us about the rebellion of Atlantis against Olympus and how Zeus had to bring the Great Flood to destroy Atlantis. It's suggesting to us that there's a faction within this advanced civilization, let's say the Anunnaki, to use the term the Sumerians referred to them with. There's a faction that is for human progress and for finding our way beyond this evolutionary bottleneck. It wants to foster further human development and to empower the human individual. And in the Sumerian context, this is the faction of Enki. You have this battle between Enki and Enlil. And Enlil is basically like Zeus or Yahweh or Indra, the lord of the Devas in Hindu mythology. A kind of tyrannical, sadistic overlord that is hampering human progress and that wants humanity to stay within a certain rigid social structure, which they control. And then you have rebels, the giants or, hybrids that form the leadership of Atlantis, who are aligned with this kind of non-human intelligence or perhaps this artificial intelligence that's looking to break us from out of this control system. That's the basic dynamic as I see it and as I outline it with, all kinds of data and multiple lines of argument in my book, Closer Encounters.
Okay. Now, if you're saying that there's multiple forms of non-human intelligence, there's potentially future humans, which you say.
No, okay, hold on. Let me stop you.
Well, that would not be non-human.
Okay, and see here, the devil's in the details here. They're manipulating us. The gatekeepers of disclosure are right now manipulating us by branding all of this non-human intelligence. There's an agenda behind it. Because what they want to say is non-human intelligence means demons and it means angels. And there's a particular sociological agenda behind that that's very dangerous.
Where is this coming from, this whole angels and demons thing?
Well, the fact of the matter is that, as Jacques Vallée demonstrated in various extremely well-researched and carefully written books, Passport to Magonia, Invisible College, And as Zecharia Sitchin argued based on his understanding of Sumerian texts, I think actually one of the best books about this subject is a text by William Bramley called The Gods of Eden. The Gods of Eden, William Bramley. This guy started out researching the history of war and profiteering. That was his objective, to understand the history of how different elites throughout time in various cultures made money off of setting people at war with one another, right? Mm-hmm. And instead what he found is a history of alien intervention in human history. That he found that all of the major wars and other horrific events that resulted in massive loss of life, like the Black Plague, were engineered by these entities who show up and do various things. Like, for example, during the Middle Ages, the image of the Grim Reaper came from these people who were shrouded in black, who had some kind of a device that they would go around and spray the fields with. Mm-hmm. And whenever they would show up and spray the fields with this device, or in some cases they would even walk through the towns and spray these things near people's doors, and everyone would flee from them. There were these really terrifying people whose faces were covered and they were shrouded in black with these things that then became, part of the image of the scythe of the Grim Reaper. And they were these entities who would come out of luminous objects that would ascend and descend into the heavens. And in fact, the visitations of these entities became so troublesome during the time of King Charlemagne that Charlemagne's court passed an edict against them. He called them the tyrants of the air. And he tried to arrest some of them, have some of them arrested, these people who were coming down from the sky, claiming that they were poisoning the fields and bringing pestilence and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, Bramley goes to research war profiteering, and he finds alien, quote unquote, intervention in human history going all the way back to the days of the Sumerians and through the Middle Ages and so forth.